people worry if you talk with kids about sex being a nice thing, that they're going to have more and everybody's going to get pregnant and STDs. And what we see is if you talk with kids about sex being a nice thing, it does not speed up the rate at which they have sex. But when they do have sex, it's safer and better for all parties.
Episode 188, Should I Talk with My Teen About Masturbation? So we're going to kick off this episode. I'm going to tell my mom, please turn this podcast off.
Actually,
this is
my
not
mom
for you.
Listens too.
This is not for you, moms. We appreciate and love your support, but I'm going to give you 5 seconds to shut it off.
Reena, are you saying that this is not a conversation you and your mom have spent a lot of time having?
I have never spoken to my mom about this. My mom would be mortified that we're actually doing this episode, Lisa.
Reena's mom, this is Lisa. Feel free to keep listening. These are important conversations to be having with our kids or to listen to our kids having with their friends.
I put extra bronzer on, which you can't see, so you don't see me blushing, because this is like such an uncomfortable topic. But I'm going to read you the letter, and I want to get right into it because I have so many questions.
Brave.
I'm going to be brave. I'm actually glad we're doing it. I really am. Dear Dr. Lisa, my husband and I were raised in a conservative religious community with a lot of fear and shame around masturbation. And now we're raising 3 of our own kids, the oldest of which is a 12-year-old boy. We're trying to raise our kids in a healthier way. And we hear the advice about sex-positive parenting. I think we're doing a good job around having conversations around sex and puberty and even porn. But talking about masturbation is scarier because it's just a bit more close and real than the other things. And there isn't really specific advice out there about it. When's the right time to talk about being gentle with your body and things like that? I have no evidence that they've started masturbating, but then again, I sure knew how to hide it when I was their age. If we talk about it too soon, will it trigger them to start masturbating? And will that lead them to earlier partnered sexual activity? In short, what's the worst way we can mess this up? Thank you for your advice on this and all the other topics on your podcast that have been so useful. I want to start with the messing it up. Like, why are we opening up this door? Is it needed to open this up in the teen years?
First of all, what's the worst way we can mess this up? Which is actually a very good way to think about a lot of parenting. Like, getting it right can look like a lot of things. Usually you can kind of put the parameters around, like, but just don't do this, right?
Yes.
Don't do this. Okay.
Really?
So the don't do this on this is like shame, right? She says the word shame.
Yeah.
And Reena, I will tell you, the consensus on all the people who do work on teenagers' sexuality, masturbation is healthy and natural. It's also something that should be private. But there should be no shame around it. So if you really want to mess it up, I would say get out in front of it and be like, this is a terrible thing you can do. Whatever was done it sounds like their experiences around it, to make people feel bad, to make them feel like there's something wrong with them, right? And, the distinction we make in psychology between guilt and shame is guilt is, I feel bad about the thing I did. Mm-hmm. Shame is, I feel bad about who I am. And, one of what things that makes us up is our human sexuality. And these are normal and natural feelings. And if you are made to feel bad about them, you cause shame. And then the thing that is so awful about it is it gets in the way of being able to enjoy one's sexual life over time. And so there's damage done in the moment of making the person feel bad. But then you hear all the time about people who have really struggled with shame in their sexual lives for their entire adulthood, and that it's really interfered with pleasure and it's really interfered with connection. And so just leave shame out of it, and you are already on the path to a good outcome.
Well, I like how this parent says she's got a 12-year-old boy. Like, should parents be bringing this up and making their kids aware of masturbation? And if so, what age?
This one's trickier, I think. And I will put more in the category of probably there's a lot of ways to get it right. If you leave shame out of it, there's a lot of ways to get it right. I would also, though, say there should be some real boundaries around this. Adult sexual lives should be private from kids. Kids' sexual lives, they deserve privacy there too, right? So when we say that masturbation is healthy and private, we mean both. We don't want kids doing it in the living room. We also mean we shouldn't intrude upon it too much, that there's a boundary to be respected. There may be some families who never bring this up with their kid. And I can see that being perfectly reasonable and healthy, and the kid figures it out and it's not a problem at all. There may be other families who say at some point along the way, maybe on a walk, maybe in the car, people don't have to look at each other. Hey, you're going to notice as your body's changing that touching yourself can feel really good. This is natural. This is healthy. This is something that people do to get to know how their body works and to get to know what they like. And you're going to hear about it. And I just want you to know it's part of healthy sexuality to explore your own body and figure out what feels good for you.
But then aren't they confused? Like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? If they're not there, especially if you might have a late bloomer, does it mean you wait on this conversation?
I mean, I think some kids will be like, what are you talking about?
Totally. Like, I have no idea what mom just said to me.
What are you talking about? And either they will go think it over for themselves, check it out for themselves. Some kids may be like, what are you talking about? At which point you can say, your genitals are designed to be very sensitive and to feel good. Other parts of your body can be the same. It's part of natural and healthy and developing sexuality to learn more about that on your own time. Mm-hmm. But you can hear, like, for me, I think like that's pretty much up against as close a boundary as I think more would start to feel, bluntly, to use a technical term, weird, right?
Yeah, totally.
But I think you can, that would be how I would propose a direct conversation about it without violating a boundary that I think does belong between adult and child sexual lives.
I think some parents might worry, what if this wasn't anywhere on my kid's radar and I bring up masturbation?
What's the worst case scenario? Your kid checks it out, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that worry, and I get it. Like, there's so much shame around it.
Yeah.
That we're like, but what if they do it then? And then you're like, oh, that's a very shame-informed worry. I think our culture has, especially our generation and older, there's been so much shame that of course those worries are going to crop up, but let's interrogate them, right? Like, okay, worst case scenario, your kid's like, I didn't know.
Now I do.
And then they check it out. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In this letter, they talk about, the word is positive sexual.
Oh, sex positive parenting.
Sex positive parenting. What is that?
So it probably means different things to different people. Here's what it means to me, is treating sexuality as part of healthy development and not treating sexuality as entirely informed by risk and shame. Mm. And so, this is what we've advocated all the time on this podcast, is that we treat sexuality as part of, just natural and healthy and normal development. This is novel. I would also say, and this is sort of, the intricacies that I have thought through over time. It may not be how everybody sees it. Mm-hmm. Talking or thinking about desire and pleasure as important. I think that's probably innate to the idea of sex positive parenting, is that like desire and pleasure are important. I would say especially for girls, that needs to be part of the conversation. I think often for boys, we presume it, like they have wants, they're going to, have a good time.
Right.
When we've looked at the data on how we talk with kids about sex, it's usually with boys, we say things like, if you're going to have sex, wear a condom, so it sort of presumes like you're into this, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And with girls, we're like, don't get pregnant, don't get yourself in a bad position. Like, it's a lot of don'ts. Mm-hmm. When I talk with young people of all genders about sexuality, I will say there's 4 things for you to focus on. Number 1, what do you want? So putting desire first for everyone in the room. Number 2, what does your partner want? Number 3, what do you both want, right? This is where consent comes in, but I think it should be wanting on both sides. And number 4, what are the risks, if any, of what you're considering? So I think like that's, to me, what sex positive means. It's treated as natural and healthy, and we center desire and want, which we also know reduces negative outcomes, right?
Yes.
People worry if you talk with kids about sex being a nice thing, that they're going to have more and everybody's going to get pregnant and STDs. And what we see is if you talk with kids about sex being a nice thing, It does not speed up the rate at which they have sex in terms of age or frequency, but when they do have sex, it's safer and better for all parties.
Masturbation doesn't necessarily lead to higher sexual activity. Tell me a little bit more about the data that you're seeing on that.
So on this one, it's just we don't see a finding one way or the other, from what I can tell. Kids who masturbate are not more likely to have partnered sex sooner or less likely to have partnered sex sooner. It seems to be disconnected. What we do see in the data is that girls who masturbate are more likely to have enjoyable sexual experiences when they are with partners. So these two things seem connected.
Why do you think that is?
I think they probably have, first of all, they're willing to explore their own body, right? And they've learned about what feels good for them. And I think it may be explained by, we also have research showing the flip, which is girls who have a negative perception of masturbation also report having more negative sexual experiences. And so for me, the way I read that as a clinician is shame has taken over, right? That there's shame about masturbation and that is carrying over to partnered experiences. And so when we look at the link between what happens in terms of masturbation and partnered experiences, the link we see is, for girls especially, masturbating leads to better experiences down the line.
You said this recently in a podcast about how proud you were of the parent, actually coming, I think it was last week's podcast about the entitled parent, at least coming to seek help. You were saying that was so important. And I love how this letter writer explains, this mom explains, that, they're in a conservative religious community, which often looks at sex in a very, very negative, shameful way. When you look at your experience of boys versus girls, what is some of the messaging that goes beyond how we talk to boys about this versus girls?
From what I understand, I actually don't have sons, but, I end up hearing about things clinically and in other ways. Boys joke about masturbation a lot more. They're much more open about it. And when we look at the data, they do masturbate more than girls. Interestingly, not all boys masturbate. Not all high school teenage boys masturbate. And I think that's a myth that is out there, that people think they're all doing it. And when we look at the rates, it's like 75% of high school boys masturbate, but that means 25% aren't, which is a not small number. It's more like 50% for girls. So that's also a pretty stark difference in terms of frequency or, engaging in this behavior.
We told our mothers to turn off the podcast at the beginning. How do you think generationally things have changed from our parents' generation to our generation to this current generation, which I think some of them are Generation Alpha.
Exactly. I know it's hard to keep track of the various. So this is fascinating, actually. The change seems to be, and I think this is all good, for girls in terms of talking more openly about pleasure and masturbation. And I have two data points I'm working with here, Reena. So one is some friends of mine, some wonderful friends with two sons and a daughter. They're all well into college age now. The boys would joke openly about masturbation at home. And one day in high school or early college, their daughter called out the parents for being kind of failed feminists for not raising the topic of masturbation with her.
Oh.
Which I thought that's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
That she's you're talking about it with the boys. You should be talking about it with me,
her.
Yeah. And Reena, when I think back generationally, I'm oh yeah, no, that was not where we were at.
No way.
The other thing that I know to be true is that these days it's not that unusual for late high school or young adult women to be giving one another vibrators as gifts.
What? What? I mean, okay, women in their 30s, 40s, 20s. Okay, I can get that.
Yeah.
What? In your teens? They're giving each other gifts?
Late teens, young adulthood, women buying vibrators for their friends as presents.
Wow.
I know. And it's funny, Reena, I have kind of a split reaction. Part of me, the 53-year-old part of me is oh, okay. Kind of taken aback. And then the part of me that's oh my gosh, I've spent my whole career trying to help girls and young women center desire around sex, and pleasure, both because they should, and secondly, because it is what leads to better health outcomes when they have intercourse. This is great, right? And way to go, ladies. Way to go.
So your sense is, much of these topics, maybe this is a conversation in the car where you can drop it, not make eye contact, but you talk about it. You open the door to know it's not shameful and just walk away and
leave it be. Yeah. And you can say, if you have questions, I can answer them. I think there was something else in this letter that is critical. It's just about like being gentle with your body. And, I think that's as much as you probably need to say. But I think it's worth saying because, as kids are figuring stuff out, they can sometimes get carried away in a way that's not so gentle with themselves.
So can I ask you a question? This might seem a little out there, but how does pornography factor into all of this?
It's not out there at all. It's important. It's really important. Okay, so here, Reena, I will say there's a little bit of a divide between what we've been able to establish from the research perspective versus what we're concerned about clinically. From the research perspective, what we have not been able to establish, and you'll understand why, is that pornography may change how people masturbate in a way that then has impact for partnered sex. And, one of the reasons it's hard to establish that is if we want to do good research, we have to do case-controlled studies, right? So we're, having to like assign people to groups of what you're masturbating to and, then following your sex life down the line. You can see why these do not lend themselves to large-scale research studies. So the research on this is a bit murky. That doesn't discount the clinical concerns we have or the worries, that people have who care for lots of young people. And the worry we have is that, first of all, I don't like kids shouldn't even be looking at porn. I mean, porn is for 18 and older at least. It's overwhelming. It's upsetting. It's very, very intense.
And we have an episode about what do you do if your kid's exposed to porn, right?
Yeah. And that's one of our most popular episodes, which we should probably run again soon, and we can come back to that. But the worry is that so much of pornography is incredibly violent and degrading and dark. And, it's not unusual for kids to masturbate to pornography, especially boys, but not just boys. And the worry is that you end up with a pairing, right? That this very, very pleasurable experience of masturbation gets connected, linked to really rough stuff, really violent stuff, really degrading stuff. And then the worry, that's like kind of worrisome on its own level, is that that's going to carry over into partnered activity. And there's some concern, that we're seeing, kind of phenomenological evidence of that. We're hearing about pretty rough sex, happening in young people. And so the concern is at two levels. One is that it would shape partnered activity in a way that is violent and degrading and yucky, right? Yeah. Which nobody wants that. The other is it will become the only way that the person can experience pleasure, right? That they
associate it that way.
They get so tightly linked that they can't actually enjoy themselves any other way. That's not great either.
Yeah.
They're both not good. So there's that. Okay.
You mentioned earlier that we should just send the message, masturbation is private, it's not like it's out in the open here. But what do you do when you've got boys who suddenly leave a T-shirt on the floor that what has happened there? What's your advice in dealing with that in a gentle way?
What you're describing, I think, is a common scenario in many homes. And I think you could probably bring it back under this should be private. So just as the kid should have privacy to enjoy themselves in their bodies, other family members should not have to be in any way brought into the child's masturbatory activity. And so I think that may be a time, if kids are leaving, what do we want to call it? I'm trying to think of a phrase,
Time to do your own laundry era.
I think you may call that time to do your own laundry time. Just say, what? You've come to an age where it's time to do your own laundry. And you don't even have to make it a thing, right? You don't even have to say, because I am not cleaning, these things. But, it's time to do your own laundry. Let me show you how to work the laundry machine. You are now in charge of your laundry.
You're so kind because I want to make it a thing. I'm just like, what is this? What are you doing? But I'm going to be zen.
I think just, keep shame out of it.
Keep shame out of it is very important. That's the big underlining message I'm learning from today.
It should be private. Reena, I had one more thought on the porn thing.
Yeah.
There's lots of reasons why I really think it's not okay for especially kids to be looking at porn.
Yeah.
That may be an opening into the conversation about masturbation, because we should be talking with kids about porn. I think we should be talking with kids about porn.
Yeah, you've been very open about that. Yep.
And so I think, and I think I would say that is an across the board recommendation, because they're gonna see it. And you want them to have your voice in their heads when they see it. And you want that voice to be saying that very rarely is porn depicting healthy, mutual sexuality. It's usually depicting something pretty violent, pretty unpleasant, overwhelming to you. I think if the child has not thrown themselves from a moving car yet, I think that you could consider advancing that conversation one step further and saying, and, it's not unusual for people to masturbate to porn. People have to be really careful with that, because it can start to associate pleasure with pretty yucky stuff. So should you want to explore your body and enjoy it, use your own fantasy, use your, variety. Don't attach that experience of enjoying your body to a script, and especially to a script that you're not going to feel good about. So I think that would be a way that you could introduce the conversation about masturbation, connected to a conversation about porn that we should definitely be having anyway.
That's great. So it all kind of links in together and makes it a little bit less painless. I sort of feel like, because you're kind of talking,
and then everybody gets to the garage and pretends like none of that ever happened.
Runs for the door. I keep hearing you talk about sort of being careful about, in those early years, of what stigmas and what pleasurable things you attach to your sexual experiences. What do we know about the sexual experiences we have in our teens, and how does it stick with us and affect us through high school? Maybe you had a really horrible, you were not ready for some sort of a sexual experience or situation that you find yourself in. Like, how do you help if not go down that road?
That's so interesting. So I think there is extra worry about teens, masturbation, pornography in this way that, the teenage brain is highly plastic. It is, forming. There are pathways you probably don't want to lay down, right? That are unique to adolescence and could persist over time. But then there's also bad sexual experiences, and yucky things that happen. And Reena, increasingly, and it's so funny, to be in my third decade of practicing, right? Just, it's weird and wonderful to watch things kind of become much more clear. And one of the things that's become more clear is stuff happens all the time that people don't want to have happen, right? They can have a lousy teacher. They can do something dumb themselves. They can have a bad sexual experience. What seems to make a difference is, are they alone with it, or can they get loving support around what happened?
Support can make a difference.
All the difference. All the difference. And it actually goes back to the shame piece, right?
Yeah.
That, you can kind of, the antidote to shame is sharing and bringing things into the light and being able to feel that it's not some deep, dark, horrible internal thing that you can't share with the world. It's funny. I hear stories about oh, this person had this thing happen.
Yeah.
And my next question is and did they feel that they had to harbor that privately for years and feel terrible?
Yeah.
Or could they say to a dear friend or a parent or a great clinician or, a trusted someone and process it and work it out? Reena, that's the great divide. That is what seems to be, from just speaking on clinical experience, the game changer here.
I was so hesitant to have this episode because I just feel like my kids aren't quite there yet. But, this is why it's so great to have these episodes, because even if you are past the mark, it's great to know, and the big takeaway for me is the shame piece. Yeah. That is just such a massive takeaway for me. On this sort of topic, when kids are kind of getting into that age where they might be seeing a romantic movie, and if there's a sex scene or something, what do we as parents need to do in that moment? Because I quickly fast forward and pretend like it didn't happen.
Don't be weird.
Don't be weird. That's just basic. Don't be weird, parents.
But here's the thing, Reena, it's so interesting. And this really gets to the boundary piece. My parents are in their 80s. I'm 53. Watching kissing on TV with my parents in the room, like, it's like so cringy, right?
100%.
It's so cringy.
So true.
And that gets to just something so, I don't know, like human. And and so I think, if you want to fast forward, you can fast forward. I white knuckle it through those things.
You do?
Everybody keeps looking at the screen.
Okay. All right. That's good to know.
Because I'm trying not to make it weird. I don't know, Reena. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. It should be fun. We should make it clear to our kids that we fully expect and want for them to have happy, healthy sex lives, right? Yeah. And that we can create an environment at home that treats sex as just a valuable and important part of life while respecting appropriate boundaries of privacy and information sharing, in a family.
Well, I love also, it's never too late to have these conversations, even if you think your child's well into this or well past it. It's never too late. And I love that you always say you can turn things around. So great advice. Now, how are you going to top this and give us a great parenting to go on masturbation?
No My parenting to go, Reena, here actually is I'm going to recommend 4 books. Wow. People don't have to read all 4 books, but I want parents to have 4 books at their disposal. 2 are by Peggy Orenstein. One is called Girls and Sex. The other is called Boys and Sex. And she does an incredibly good job of laying out the kind of phenomenological landscape of adolescent and young adult sex now. Mm-hmm. So that would be a great place to start, just to sort of learn where things are. The second 2 are guidance books for parents. The first is called Sex, Teens, and Everything in Between by Shafaya Zaloom. Brilliant book. She's a great sex educator. The 4th book is the most recent, and it's called Yes, Your Kid. And it's by Debbie Herbenek, who is a professor at Indiana University. She does great work on adolescence and sexuality, and she is just unflinching and honest. I mean, she and Shafaya Zaloom, I think, really cover this territory incredibly well. And so I would say across those 4 books,
that's great.
Parents can find everything they need, and they're all excellent, excellent resources.
That's great. It's always great to have extra resources when you feel like you need a little bit more shoring up on that. Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm really glad we did this episode because no one's talking about it. So thank you. Thank you for
You're welcome. Yeah, no, we did it,
advice.
Reena.
We did it, and
Your
I felt very good
again.
about it. She can listen again. I'll tell her next week. I'll see you next week, Lisa.
I'll see you next week.